my pack, my tribe. Welcome to Howling After Dark. So, tonight's show is not necessarily paranormal. It is still creepy, though. It's still kind of parallel, if you will, to what we usually talk about. These are horror stories, if you will, of mishaps, misadventures, mistakes, catastrophes that took place while cave diving. I'm actually going to play you a bit of a clip right now. I actually might play the whole first part, but I'm sure a lot of you out there are already aware of the gentleman, Mr. Ballin, and his very successful YouTube and podcast and pretty much everything that he's done so far. But he captures people's attention with his storytelling. He's a phenomenal storyteller. And I'm man enough to admit that he is a far better storyteller than I am. In certain respects. I'm a much better comedian. I'll say that. Even though my comedy is comedic storytelling, but point is he's phenomenal at what he does. He is very talented with capturing the imagination of his listeners. So, without further ado, I'm going to play you this clip. And by the way, just so there's no copyright confusion, I don't own any of what I'm about to play you. This is all Mr. Ballin. All glory and accolades go to him. I'm not claiming any of it. So, please don't hit me with, copyright bullshit. I'm playing this for a reason, just to illustrate how good he is, and other aspects, which I'll get into after I play this. Alright? So, here we go.
If you suffer from claustrophobia, this is probably not a good video for you. But before I get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel, because that's all we do, and we upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please sneak into the like button's house and line the floor next to their bed with Lego pieces, and then set off their fire alarm. Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Alright, let's get into today's stories. In New Mexico, there is a very deep body of water called the Blue Hole that formed after this huge sinkhole filled with water. And because the visibility inside of the Blue Hole is so good, it's become a very popular swimming and underwater diving site. But at the bottom of the Blue Hole, 84 feet down, there is this little tiny opening that almost looks like the drain at the bottom of your bathtub, except it's just big enough that a grown person with scuba tanks on could wriggle through it. And if they did, they'd be entering into a vast network of tunnels and caves that have never been mapped, and many of them have never been explored. In 1976, 2 recreational divers from Oklahoma and were exploring that deep section of the Blue Hole when they got lost and drowned. When the police went in, they started to get lost themselves, and when they finally located the bodies and brought them up again, they told the owners of the land that the Blue Hole was on that section of the cave is incredibly dangerous, and until you get someone in here to professionally map it out, you really should not be letting anyone go down there. And so the owners decided, you know what, instead of mapping this out, let's just seal it off permanently. And so they put this huge metal grate over it and bolted that down, and then they put a whole bunch of boulders over that sealed up metal grate. Fast forward to 2016, and an elite diving organization called the ADM Exploration Foundation that literally goes around the world exploring unmapped caves and professionally maps them, they reached out to the owners of the Blue Hole Cave and said, hey, we'd be happy to map out your forbidden section. and the owners granted them permission. So this would be the first time in 40 years that anyone had been in the deepest section of the Blue Hole. One of the divers that was going to be on this excursion was a guy named Shane Thompson. He had been a diving instructor for the United States Navy before becoming an advanced scuba instructor in San Diego. All in, he had about 20 years of diving experience, most of it the cave diving variety. On March 26th, 2016, the boulders were removed and the grate was unbolted, and the entrance to the forbidden section of the Blue Hole was now open. Shane had actually been told to stay on land as a safety standby diver, while another diver named Mike Young was going to be the first into the cave and would just explore the upper section. But as soon as Mike Young got in the water that morning, a couple minutes later, Shane was in the water after him, and Mike remembers as he was making his way down the main cavern section before getting to the actual forbidden entrance, looking up and seeing Shane coming towards him and thinking, I thought he was supposed to stay on land, but he figured someone must have told him to go in, and so he didn't think much about it. And so Shane and Mike continue down to the entrance. Shane would be the first one to wriggle his way through this very claustrophobia-inducing entrance. Once he was through, Mike followed after him, and at this point, it's pitch black. I mean, there's a little bit of light up in the main cavern, but once you're down below in the forbidden section, you can't see anything. So they both got their high-powered flashlights out, and immediately as they're kicking it out down the tunnel, they realize there's a lot of silt inside of this section. I mean, no one's been down here in 40 years, so everything is just kind of settled, and so their lights aren't really that good. It would be like driving in really intense fog and turning on your high beams. That's not going to do anything. You're just going to illuminate the fog around you. But they were kind of expecting this, so they just slowly made their way forward before Shane identified a tunnel that kind of branched off to the right, and so Shane is pointing his light down this tunnel. Mike sees Shane pointing it, so he goes up and he looks too, and they can see there is an opening at the end of this tunnel, maybe 20-30 feet down, that appears to open up into a much larger cavern. But what they were not able to see from their position, or perhaps just in haste they didn't realize this, is the tunnel actually starts big and then funnels down to almost a point. And in order to get into that larger cavern at the end of the tunnel, you basically need to force yourself through that hole. It is not an easy space to fit through. But either way, Shane takes off first, Mike follows him, and as they're moving down this tunnel, the silt is getting kicked up very dramatically all around them. And so now they cannot tell that the walls are basically closing in on them. And as they're getting closer and closer to what they think is going to be this huge cavern, they actually suddenly get stuck. Shane gets stuck first, Mike comes up alongside him because it's so silty he can't see, and he swims right between Shane's leg and the wall and gets wedged. Mike stays calm and begins to push himself backwards to just retreat out of the situation he is in. He can't see anything, but he can tell what he needs to do. Shane, meanwhile, who's basically right in front of him, he starts kicking like a madman. In fact, his fins are hitting Mike in the head, and all the silt is getting kicked up, and so Mike just continues to push himself back all the way back about 10 or 15 feet, while Shane, in a total panic, instead of coming backwards towards Mike, begins going forward through this tiny little narrow opening and somehow manages to force himself into this chamber. Mike has retreated back out to the main hallway, and he's just waiting for Shane to do the same thing. But when he never shows up, Mike goes back down the tunnel, he goes right up to the little entrance into this cavern, and he pokes his head in and he scans the light around, and he doesn't see Shane anywhere, but he sees right away that there's all these different exits into different tunnels that shoot all over this cavern. And remember, this is a totally unexplored section, and so there's no way for him to know where any of these go. But he knows Shane had to have gone this way. It's only been a few moments. He's got to be in here somewhere. And so he takes a deep breath, and he begins forcing himself through this tiny little hole, which took him quite a while, because Shane, when he went through, it was adrenaline and panic that pushed him through, which is probably why he did it so quickly. Mike really struggled to get through it. But once he was through, he pointed his light up and he looked for the biggest opening to one of those tunnels, and he began swimming up after Shane. And after a very long and windy and at times incredibly narrow, where Mike is second guessing himself why he's even doing this, he manages to get to the end, and it's a dead end, and curled up at the very back of the dead end was Shane. His mouthpiece was out and he was deceased. Mike was unable to recover him this day. He had to go all the way back out, force himself back through that hole, and go up to the surface and get some other people involved before they could come back and recover his body. So the running theory is that when Shane panicked and began swimming through that tight little space into that chamber, he must have somehow believed that he had gotten turned around and was making his way towards the exit. Now, it's easy for us to say, dude, you're in a tight little tunnel and you couldn't even get out. How could you have possibly turned around? But in reality, when you're stuck hundreds of feet underground in a tunnel that is unexplored. Silt's been kicked up all around you. Someone's blocking your way behind you. There's something blocking your way ahead, and you're pinched all around on your side by rocks. The mind can do some pretty crazy and delusional things. And once he pushed through that hole using adrenaline to force himself through, he went up thinking, I'm gonna get out, I'm gonna get out. Except he went into a dead end. And by the time he reached the end, either his mouthpiece was knocked out or he passed out and he dropped the mouthpiece out of his mouth. But either way, it shows you what can happen when you are trapped underwater and you panic. After Shane's body was recovered, they resealed the forbidden section, and to this day, no one is allowed to go in again.
Okay, so as you can see, he's a phenomenal storyteller, and he like when he's talking, right, and telling you stories, I can actually picture in my head what he's talking about. Like that's a gift. But I want to make a couple things very clear. No, there's no type of diving. None. I don't care if you're in shallow water. I don't care if you're 100 feet down or 200 feet down or 300 feet down or however far down. I don't care. There is no type of diving that is not dangerous. Okay? And you know, it's not just me saying this. I'm literally repeating to you what my diving instructor told me years ago. Right? There's literally no type of diving that is not dangerous. There's levels of danger with different types of diving. That is true. But it's all dangerous. It doesn't matter. Right? Because there's so many things that can go wrong. Okay, I'm going to tell you, to illuminate this point, I'm going to tell you a different story. So, if there are any divers listening, you probably went through something similar to this. So, when you're first learning to dive, they have a floor or a limit to how deep you can go, right? Like, so when you're a student diver, you only go as deep as the instructor goes, and it's usually something like 60, maybe 80 feet, right? So it's deep, but it's not super deep. And in some cases it's even 20 or 40 or, you know, whatever. It's up to the instructor, basically. So, we were on, it wasn't our last guided dive. It was probably third to last, maybe fourth to last guided dive, right? And I honestly don't even know if I ever knew this dude's name, so bear with me. But there was this one guy in our class, and we were diving in this particular area of Mission Bay in San Diego. Okay, so those waters do get deep, but it's calm waters for the most part. So, like your visibility is better. in Mission Bay than it would be at, say, off of Mission Beach, right? Because the water's being so calm, it kicks up a lot less silt, right? Silt, for those that don't know, is kind of like dust on the bottom of the ocean that gets kicked up through currents and whatnot. So, anyways, we're about 40 feet down, right? And there's sharks in the water, like they're swimming around us. Like, to kind of illustrate this point, right? So, when you're diving, you see sharks in the water. They're not really aware that you're there, unless you're bleeding or wearing super bright colors or something, because they can't really see very well. They have excellent sense of smell, and they have these kind of receptors on their skin that they can feel like vibrations in the water and stuff, but they can't really see you. So the key is you don't panic, right? If you panic, you move a lot. When you move a lot, then they'll know you're there, right? But if you're just calmly diving in the water, they're not even aware of you. And so this dude sees this shark, and it wasn't even that big of a shark. It was like a thresher, maybe. I'm telling it like this because I didn't see it. I just saw the sharks that were, kind of around me, which, there was a great white, but, he was like some distance off, and he wasn't bothering us any. And then, there were some threshers and some other stuff, but it wasn't like a big deal to me, because it had been pounded in my head. If you see sharks in the water, you never panic, because that's what will alert them to your presence. And so, I was kind of in awe by it, to be honest. So I was just kind of having a great time. But this guy was probably on the other end of what they call the field, right? Which is like this mapped out like area that you're allowed to dive in. That's well, for us it was basically 80 feet by 80 feet, right? So 80 feet across, 80 feet down, or up, or whichever. So I didn't actually see this happen, but so this is all secondhand information. This is the point. So evidently what happened was this dude panicked when he saw the shark and went below the floor, the limit. And when he went below the limit, he was panicking so hard that he actually knocked out his own mouthpiece, sucked in a bunch of water, and then couldn't find his mouthpiece and ended up drowning in the water. Now, the reason I'm telling this story is because in situations that aren't perceived by you to be normal in the water as a diver, you can panic, right? And people that panic are generally the ones who end up getting hurt. They end up dying because they're not keeping cool, and when you panic, that's when accidents happen, right? So, dude basically knocked out his own mouthpiece and drowned because he panicked, right? So most of the stories you hear from like Mr. Ballin and stuff about all these diving fatalities, well, yes, those things do happen, and certain things can definitely happen to anybody. It's one of those things that's dangerous, right? Like there's no type of diving that isn't dangerous. Whether you're in shallow, water of like 40 feet, or you're, hundreds of feet down, it's when you panic and do stupid things that a lot of the time that these things happen. Now, I'm not saying that the people that this shit happened to are stupid. Of course they're not. But when you panic, you make stupid mistakes. Now, having said all of that, there's no type of diving that is not dangerous. And there's no type of diving where you can be stupid and come out unscathed, okay? But cave diving, that is exponentially more so, okay? Because you're, whether or not the walls are tight around you, or they're far, far away, so far away that your flashlight can't even pick up the walls, doesn't matter. If you're stupid in that environment, it will kill you. Now, I'm not saying that those people were stupid. I'm saying they did stupid shit in those situations, things that could have been avoided. For instance, that story you heard Mr. Ballin telling you, I can tell you what this guy should have done, in my opinion. And I haven't done a whole heck of a lot of cave diving, nor do I plan to. It's not, I'm sure there are situations down there where it's beautiful, but a lot of cave diving happens so deep that you can't see it anyways. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like, why? It has no appeal to me, I guess. And that's just a personal preference kind of thing. But what this guy should have done, in my opinion, is he should have either backed out instead of swimming through. Because he should have been able to feel when the guy behind him backed up. Alright, so he should have either backed out, or when he managed to get through and he's looking around and he's thinking he got turned around, he knows that there's somebody else there, right, that was behind him. So he should have picked that person out with his flashlight, taken his tank off, and pushed the tank back through to the side he started from. Right? And the reason he should have taken his tank off and pushed it through is because it being such a tight fit, there's a lot of situations like that where you do not want to be wearing your tank. Because little jagged piece of rocks could like puncture your airline. You know, it could you could end up knocking off the regulator valve on your tank. You know, all sorts of shit can happen. So if you protect your tank, you protect your life. Alright? So that's what I think he should have done. I think he should have flipped around and went back through with his tank off and pushed his tank in front of him, because you know what happened to him was so avoidable, really. And I want to be clear, I'm not blaming him. Like, he's the victim, I get it. I'm not blaming him. I'm just saying that you know, it could have been avoided. Right? And he could have done, you know, these little things that could have saved his life. Now, I get it. He's down there and you know, he thought he was turned around and, you know, all that stuff. But it only takes a second to verify that. You know what I mean? Because if he would have shined the light back through where he came from, he would have seen the other diver and realized, oh no, I'm on the other side. I need to go back through. But in his panic like state, he wasn't thinking about that, and that's the whole point. Is when you panic, you become stupid. It's not that you are stupid, although I'm sure there are people that go down that are fucking stupid. But this guy wasn't stupid. He just panicked. Is my point. And when you panic, you do stupid things. Right, and diving is one of those activities where panicking will just get you killed. Like you need to be almost zen to be in that situation and come out of it, because you know, you can't panic. You know, you have to keep a clear head and all that stuff. And diving, like I said, there is no type of diving that isn't dangerous. Doesn't mean it's not worth doing necessarily, but to each their own. And you know, even if I did cave dive, I wouldn't have even gone down that deep, to be honest with you. Just me personally, like, I want to be where I can see what's around me. You know, I don't mind going down into caves as long as they're not down that far. You know, but I'm not going hundreds and hundreds of feet down into a freaking cave. It's kind of pointless to me because you can't see anything. And that's the whole point to me for diving, is just be down where you can see what's around you and enjoy, you know, like the sea life and stuff. So, you know, but that's my thing, and, you know, like I said, to each their own. But, like, no matter what kind of diving you're doing, and it's not even just diving, it's anything, like I could tell you stories about skydivers that died that didn't need to. Just the same way, because they panicked in the moment. And, all that stuff. But, there are activities like that are incredibly dangerous. And so you can't take anything for granted. Like, I happen to know of a diver. I didn't know the guy personally. His name was, Donald Sweet, I want to say. That could be wrong. But, and he lived through this, but it was close. It was a shallow dive. The floor was about 60 feet. And this was not a guided dive, right? It was just a dive in shallower water. He wanted to go down to take underwater pictures, right, of like the sea life and the coral and whatnot. But he made a foolish, not saying that he's a fool or was stupid, he wasn't. I mean, this is one of those things that probably could happen to anybody, but, especially when they're first starting out and they're not aware of everything you're supposed to do. But basically what had happened is we were on this dive boat and he went down. And when he went down, and he was strapping on all of his equipment, strapped on his tank, strapped on his weight belt and stuff, and was checking his mouthpiece and checking his goggles and wetting his goggles, which you do just to make sure that they're properly sealed. He did not realize that he had grabbed the wrong tank. Now, this is a simple mistake. A lot of people have done it. But this is why I was so paranoid about this. When I was diving, I would actually write my initials on my tank. And, like grease pencil, which would, it would wash off, but, before we got in the water, it was just an extra layer of protecting myself, making sure I got the right tank, because what happened, this guy could have killed him. The tank that he grabbed was actually a mixed gas, what they call a mixed gas tank. Which is a mixture of oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen, right? And this is a tank that you use for extremely deep dives, like beyond 130 feet. And he grabbed that tank and was down there for like 5 minutes, breathing this gas mixture, which if you're not at, beyond 130 feet, can actually give you what's called nitrogen narcosis, which is your body absorbs too much nitrogen, and it affects you the same way as if you were really drunk. And luckily, hold on. Luckily, he realized his mistake after he started to feel weird and came up, and he was fine, but had he been on a deep dive and made that mistake, it could have killed him. Because when you're under those effects of nitrogen narcosis, you can sort of have hallucinations, or maybe not hallucinations, more like delusions. And there's been, you know, cases where guys have suffered from it, and then started taking their gear off because they didn't realize they were underwater. You know, shit like that. So, point is yes, diving is an extremely dangerous thing. You should be certified to do any kind of diving. And before you go beyond the absolute floor of 130 feet, you should be trained and certified to use mixed gas tanks. Because so many of these stories, mostly the stories you hear, like from Mr. Ball and stuff about diving, are people doing stupid shit. Like going beyond 130 feet on regular oxygen. That's a good way to die. Because you're almost guaranteed at that point to get nitrogen narcosis. Which will kill you. Okay, so just believe me when I say every part of diving is dangerous, but if you take precautions and you do the things you're supposed to do and don't do the things you're not supposed to do, most of the time you'll be just fine. But there's always going to be an element of danger to it, just like jumping out of a plane. You know, you could be the most experienced, you know, skydiver in the world and still die because you made a stupid mistake. You know, because you weren't being vigilant and double and triple checking things, you know. You could be the most seasoned rock climber in the world and die from a stupid mistake. You know, no matter what it is, if you're not vigilant and you're not on top of everything and you're not double and triple checking every single thing, you can die from a stupid mistake. There's a story of a skydiver, right? And I don't remember the gentleman's name, and I'm not saying that he was necessarily, you know, stupid, but he did make a stupid mistake, and it cost him his life. So this guy really got into skydiving. He ended up getting a job as a skydiving instructor. And he was also the videographer for the skydiving school. And he had a backpack that had all of his camera equipment in it. Right? And he had done a bunch of jumps this day. And he had to go back up for one last jump. And so he grabbed his camera and grabbed his parachute, and they went up to their jump height, which I think was like 12,000 feet or so. And he goes out first, and the instructor and student do tandem jumps. So like the student's attached to the instructor, they do tandem jump right after him, and he's, looking up with the camera, filming it, and, everything's great. He's following them all the way down, and they get to their jump altitude, and the instructor and the student, pull their cord, parachute deploys, and they, land safely. Well, after they pull their cord, this gentleman who was an instructor and videographer who went up with him went to pull his cord, and that was when he realized he didn't have a parachute on his back. He had his fucking backpack with his camera equipment. Stupid mistake. And it's just, if you're into anything that's kind of extreme, whether it be, diving, skydiving, rock climbing, mountain biking, BMX, skateboarding, whatever it is, if you don't take proper precautions and you're not vigilant about the stuff that you do and the things that are in your environment, it can kill you. I've known of mountain bikers actually that I have a lot of respect for mountain bikers, by the way, especially since Red Bull started doing all the mountain biking events. Like my favorite Slopestyle, because they do these amazing tricks on a mountain bike that just blow my mind. But years and years before Red Bull was like a mountain bike like sponsor, there was this guy, and I I'm shit with names, so forgive me, but he did this like what they call a line, and this particular line starts at the top of this near straight down drop that's must be like 80 feet, and but like where he was, like if you drop down to the right, you'll drop 80 feet, but then it'll like slope out, and then you're on this track, right? It's gonna essentially take you down the mountain. But if you go just like 10 feet to the left, you're going to hit like this natural, like almost like a ramp, and you're going to launch clear off the fucking mountain. Alright, and essentially that's what he fucking did. He went a little bit too left and hit that ramp and went right off the mountain and couldn't stop, because he was going so fast when he hit that ramp. By the time he realized he was in the wrong spot, it was too late. So just be vigilant, because yes, we love the extreme. Yes, we love to see all these tricks and people do all this extreme stuff. And yes, we're into all that. Doesn't mean we want to see you die. Nobody wants that. Least of all you. So just be vigilant. Be hyper aware. Be paranoid, in fact, about checking and double checking every single thing. Because if you don't, you're literally taking your life in your hands and flushing it down the toilet. Because you made a mistake that needn't have happened. Now, once again, I want to be very clear with people. I'm not victim blaming at all. You know, these things that I've talked about tonight, these things that you heard Mr. Ballin talk about, these are things that literally could have happened to anybody. I'm just pointing out that they were avoidable. Sorry, letting the dogs in. Well, come on. Scoop, scoop, Nachi, scoop. Thank you. Alright. Sorry about that. Point is all this shit is avoidable. It didn't need to happen, but, you know, it did. You know, and there's so many more of those diving stories, by the way. And most of them are things that were like diver error. You know, I really hate to say that, but it's true. But there is one story in a place called Indian Springs, right? So Indian Springs is the deepest freshwater cave, I think, in the world. I think it drops down to like just beyond 800 feet down, right? But it's kind of shaped like an hourglass. So you're in this big room, and then you dive, and you get to, I think it's about 120 feet down, something like that. And you know, just like an hourglass, it narrows down to a small opening, and this they called the what is it? It's the squaws. God, I'm trying to remember the word. It's the squaws something or other, and so in order to get all the way down, you have to go through this small opening, and these two guys were diving down, and they went through the squaws hole or whatever they call it. And you know, they're not too much deeper than that. Like, they're just past it, really. And for some reason, they one guy looks at his O2 meter and shows it to the other guy, and sees that they only got about 10 minutes left. And so they decide to go back up, and they have this guideline that goes all the way down to the bottom, right? That has a weight on one end that they dropped so that they could stay on the guideline all the way down. And so they decide to go back up, and they follow the guideline back up, and they get to where this squaw's hole, or whatever it's called, is, and they're touching like solid rock or earth or whatever. And I was thinking, wait a minute, are we in the wrong spot? And, you know, so they start to look around, And then they come back to the line and realize that this squaw's hole, or like I said, whatever it's called, has caved in. Now, that's not diver error. That could literally happen to anybody. That wasn't their fault. But the one guy looks at the other dude and says, and they have like slates so that they can write messages on it, so that they, because they can't talk. And he says, "Stay here, I'll be right back." And he swims off looking for another exit and doesn't find one, and comes back to the guideline, and he's looking, and the other guy is not there. And so he looks up, and he sees his friend's tank floating up by where the guideline goes into the rocks or whatever, and he sees that there's a gap, and he's thinking, oh, he must have taken his tank off and tried to go up the rest of the way on a breath hold, which is when you literally hold your breath, and but ironically, because something he did when he went through actually made it a big enough opening that this guy could go through with his tank on. And so he starts following the guideline up through this, mess of crumbled earth and rock, and gets through, and he's got his flashlight, and he's looking around, and he can see that the other guy is kind of floating, and he is deceased. So, I mean, it's not all diver error, but like a lot of it is. And your chances of dying are exponentially greater if you panic or being stupid or trying to show off, or whatever it is that is taking your attention away from what you should be focusing on, which is getting down and getting back up safely. But there are those cases where, it was unavoidable. And it wasn't diver error. It was, the result of an accident or some kind of disaster. Like there's another story, and this will be my last story for the night. And Mr. Ballin actually tells a story much better than I do, but so on oil rigs, I don't know if you're aware, their bottoms actually go all the way down to the C4. Right? So it could be, 100 feet, it could be 2,000 feet. And when you're that deep down at 2,000 feet and beyond, the only way to dive that deep is with what they call a bell. What this is essentially it's a pressurized room that is attached to a tether that runs up to a ship. Right? And you can open the hatch on the bell, on the floor of the bell, and you're looking down at water, but it's not flooding in because it's pressurized. So it's actually holding the water down. So you can come in and out as you need to and work on the bottom of this rig, welding things together, or doing whatever, making repairs, doing whatever you need to do. But it is a long shift kind of thing. So there's usually a diver that's in the water, a diver that stays in the bell, and I think a third guy that basically supports them both. I believe that's how it works. So I believe it was in Alaska, or near Alaska, and they were having this huge storm rolling in. And the guys that were down in this bell didn't, had heard about it, but they're trying to get this work done so that they could go up. But the problem when you're down that deep is when they bring you up, you have to go directly into a pressure chamber. Otherwise, you'll get what's known as the bends, which is when you come up too fast, and what's literally happening is your blood vessels in your veins are actually exploding because of, gas mixtures and pressure, and look it up. You'll figure it out. Anyways, so once they come up, they've actually got to spend, I think it's like a week or so inside this pressure chamber before they can, be released, because you have, normally when you dive, to any great depth, you have to make what's called pressure stops ever so often as you come up. And at 2,000 feet, that is a shit ton of pressure stops. I think somebody worked it out to where, like, at 2,000 feet, it's so many pressure stops it would literally take you weeks to reach the surface safely, right? So their way of doing it is they put you in this bell. You're in the bell. It's pressurized. When you're coming up, you close the hatch. They bring you all the way up to the ship, and this bell actually attaches to the pressure chamber. So you can go into the pressure chamber without losing any of that pressure. So you're at the same pressure you were when you were 2,000 feet below. And then you close that hatch, and you're sitting there over like a week's time, or however long it is, as they slowly and safely decrease the pressure gradually, as if you were making all these pressure stops. But what happened is a storm. Honey, what do you want? You're driving me nuts. I love my puppies, but they drive me insane. Well, at least this one does. Anyways. So, what? What do you want? Anyways, so basically what the pressure chamber does is it mimics the same effect as taking these pressure stops along the way. Alright? But it's also a way for them to send shifts back and forth without losing any time of work. Alright? Because it's very expensive to do this. And they can't afford to lose any time, right? So the storm hits, and the tether that is attaching the ship and the bell snaps, and the bell drops all the way down to the bottom of the ocean, which means that this bell, while they are still pressurized, they have lost communication with the ship, and they've also lost their heat. So what's going to happen is gradually the inside of the bell is going to reach the same temperature as the water that surrounds it, which that far down is freezing. Like, to the point you're going to be, hypothermic very, pretty quickly. And so, there's this other ship that shows up and attempts to attach a new tether to the dive bell, and they get it attached, and they try to haul them up, and then that one snaps or breaks off, and so they have to attach it again, and they had already lowered another bell to get the diver that was in the water, and he's fine, and but they couldn't get this tether. They kept trying to get this tether attached to this bell to raise the bell up, and I do believe that both men inside were deceased, or one was deceased and one lived. I can't remember, but something to that effect. The point is it's a very dangerous thing, right? It doesn't matter if it's shallow water, doesn't mean if it's 2,000 feet down, it's dangerous. And it's made more dangerous by stupidity, or by panicking, or by not having 100% of your focus on what you're supposed to be doing. So, and it doesn't matter what you do. If it's like an extreme sport kind of thing, if it's, skydiving, bungee jumping, rock climbing, whatever it is, there are so many examples of people dying because they weren't focused in that moment, that critical moment that could have saved their life, and they made that stupid mistake. Right? Like, what's his name? Aaron, I think his first name was. I can't remember his last name. The guy from 127 Hours, the real guy. Right? Which, if you haven't seen 127 Hours, it is a very hard movie to watch. I will tell you that, and not because it's a bad movie, but because it's like you know what's coming the entire time, right? And that part is extremely hard to watch. So if you're unfamiliar, basically this guy was, I believe it was in Utah, but I could be mistaken. He was rock climbing, and this boulder came down and basically pinned his arm against one side of these two cliffs that were like parallel to each other. And so he's caught in the middle of this like little canyon, pinned there by this massive boulder, and he can't get out. Right? Now, that wasn't his fault. That could happen to anybody. Right? And he was trapped there for 5 days. 5 days. That's insane. But all he had was, I think he had like a protein bar, a camera, and like a 12-ounce water bottle. So he nursed his bottle. I think at one point he actually had to drink his own urine. And he realized that, he's going to die here. And he could have made that mistake and gave in to, the self-doubt and the depression and just giving up and all that. But he had a dream, and in the dream he saw himself with a kid, playing with this kid, and he had one arm. And so he wakes up after that and realizes, hey, I want to live. How do I get out of this? Because all I've got is this, protein bar, 12-ounce thing of water, and a little multi-tool with a really dull knife on it. And this knife's too dull, it's not going to cut through bone. And so he breaks his own arm and cuts through the break. Right? If he would have given in or panicked at that moment, he would not have survived. I believe his name was Aaron Hedges, but I might be wrong. Like I said, I'm shit with names. What? What do you want? Huh? What is it? Anyways, my pack, my tribe, that's about all I got for tonight. Until next time, peace out.